But I just want to ask by show of hands, who has heard of G.K. Chesterton in this room? Raise your hand. Who has not? It's totally okay if you have. All right, good. I'll be speaking just to you guys. Just kidding. I love this guy. He's a large, portly, joyful presence. He was a reporter, a journalist. He loved kids. He wrote all kinds of genres. His chief attribute, though, is sort of this happy joyfulness that we associate with him. We don't think of him as suffering or having a really bad time in his life, but he did, in fact, have all kinds of suffering. But more on that in a moment. First, just to familiarize yourself or ourselves with him, he wrote Orthodoxy, which is a great book of theology. Helped inspire C.S. Lewis. He wrote the Father Brown Mysteries. Who's read these in this room? These are awesome mystery stories, highly recommended. And this really wacky novel called The Man Who's Thursday, which is like this anarchist, sort of fever dream action story set in London with all kinds of wacky elements. The ending still escapes me. I've read it a couple times and I know it happens, but I love it anyway. You guys would too. But he also wrote poetry, also journalism, and a couple of spiritual biographies. So his most famous one is St. Francis of Assisi. He also wrote one about St. Thomas, which is less good, but I like this one a lot, so you should check it out. He was someone who wrote so much that even though I consider myself a Chestertonophile, by no means an expert, I've read only a small fraction of all his things. He has like a dozen collected volumes just about his work, and there's other stuff which hasn't even been published yet. So all to say, he made an impact. He lived for about 60 years, from mid-1870s through the mid-1930s, and also knew people like George Bernard Shaw and Hilaire Belloc. They're buddies. In fact, they're so close, Hilaire Belloc and Chesterton, who was another reporter and writer. They called them together the Chester Belloc, because they were just an inseparable team. Hilaire was not hilarious at all. He's a very glum sort of guy. He was a widower, wrote all kinds of serious essays. He was an awesome yin to Chesterton's yang and sort of the grounding force in his life. And Shaw was, of course, kind of agnostic-y and kind of irascible and didn't like Chesterton's theology, but they were still good friends. And toured England together and toured Scotland and Ireland together, all of the United Kingdom, and were such good friends that when Chesterton died, Bernard Shaw gave his letters that he got from Chesterton to Chesterton's biography, Macy Ward. So they were very close friends despite their opposite sides. But then also, Chesterton, argued with H.G. Wells. It was somebody who was very well known for just being involved in the current affairs of his time. He's less well known, I think, today because unlike C.S. Lewis, who wrote more transcendental type things in terms of always applying to almost any cultural situation, Chesterton wrote about current affairs, very specific things, like today's tragic attack on Brussels. He would be talking about that. Chesterton would write about that sort of thing sometimes, but he would write more on ongoing topics that would be of interest to Christians for the rest of the century. So I think in some ways, while Chesterton has experience of a revival, and I encourage you to help me with that revival, please, he is still, I think, a little obscure in a way. He was tied to all kinds of current happenings for his time. In many ways, he was primarily a journalist first, an essayist and poet and novelist, and comic for sort of second, third, fourth, fifth. All that to say, I want to talk to you about the young Chesterton first of all. Here he is, skinnier, 16-year-old kid, and as a still relatively skinny, late 20-something. Not the big, boisterous, chubby guy we think of today. Much more serious and sad. He was an art school student. If anyone has ever done art, you guys know what I'm talking about. Art kids tend to be a little emotional and dramatic. I may have been one earlier in my life. He suffered from extreme depression, and while no one has ever come out and said it among his biographers, I think from what I've read of him that he contemplated suicide. I think I can prove this or show this in his writing because he talks about sort of the blackness, looking into the abyss, not knowing where his hope comes from anymore, just sort of being without any sort of reason to live anymore. His autobiography talks about this. He doesn't say it himself, but he speaks of it as if he thought about it. And so he's somebody who, despite his later conversion to Christianity, for a long time engaged with doubt and depression and sadness. And I think we should resurrect this remembrance of who he is and think about this as we think about Chesterton. Anyway, he went to the Slade School of Art, which is in London, at UCL. It's this awesome building. He wasn't wearing a dress, but he was with hanging out with ladies and they're painting things and sketching things. He was a boy in a very female-oriented college, young man, 1893, still suffering from depression. He's influenced by people like Oscar Wilde, who is, of course, a bit decadent, and he dabbled in socialism. He was searching for some meaning. He even played with what they call a planchette, which is a Ouija board, and dabbled in all kinds of creepy spiritualism, in his own words. And in the midst of all this, he is looking for some sort of faith, some sort of hope, and he finds it through some faithful Christian friends who say, I'm going to hang out with this weird art school kid. I'm going to help him understand what Jesus is all about. So he thanks his friends and his awesome wife, Francie, which we'll talk about in a second, for his conversion. But reflecting on his experiences, he writes this poem, which I'll read to you, about suicide. And it's seemingly a bit flip, but I think because he dabbled and engaged with depression and really was sunk into it, actually, it means something. So I'll read this to you now. The gallows in my garden, people say, is neat and tight and adequately tall. I tie the noose on the knowing way as one that knots his necktie for a ball. But just as all the neighbors on the wall are drawing a long breath to shout, hooray, the strangest whim has seized me. After all, I think I will not hang myself today. Tomorrow is a time I get my pay. My uncle's sword is hanging in the hall. I see a little cloud all pink and gray. Perhaps the rector's mother will not call. Fancy I heard Mr. Gall. Mushrooms could be cooked another way. I never read the works of Juvenal. Perhaps I won't hang myself. The world will have another washing day. The decadence decay, the pendants pile. And H.G. Wells has found that children play. And brown Shaws, they squall. Rationalists are growing irrational, and through the thick woods one finds a stream astray. So secret with the very sky seems small, I think I will not hang myself today. This is sort of like a stanza ending comment and go on. Prince, I can hear the trumpet of Germinal, the tumbrils tolling up a terrible way. Even today your royal head may fall, I think I will not hang myself today. And this point in his early life, he discovers the joy of being simply alive. And I think because of his new faith in Christ, he realizes that it's really a privilege to be walking and talking and breathing and even suffering in a way. And this theme goes through his whole life, and it helps him transcend two other incidents, which I think are incredibly distressing and need to be remembered with him. Here's Francie, his beautiful, gorgeous wife, devout Anglican, loved Jesus, helped him become a Christian through a very long romance. He had to convince her mother that he can make up money to actually keep her from dying of starvation. So he wrote long letters to Mrs. Blogg, her mom, said things like, I will make 3 pounds from this story on the 21st, I will make 6 pounds from this story on the 18th. Together it means I will make 9 pounds by the end of the month, and I can definitely buy your daughter milk and bread. So please let me marry her. Eventually, Mrs. Blogg said, okay, fine, you can marry my daughter. And they got married. It was like a 4-year courtship. Imagine dating someone for 4 years. It's a long time back then. But they get married. They get down into married life. They want kids really, really bad, and they discover that both of them are infertile. And at that time, it's very tragic, because in that time, in Victorian England, like Misha can say, speak to, being fertile and being full of family life was sort of God's blessing on your family. If you didn't have that, you were sort of a tragic figure. No one wanted anything to do with you. You were a childless couple. And I think this early moment of their marriage really defined what they were going to be about. Instead of shrinking though back from this and saying, we can't have kids, we're not going to be externally oriented, we're going to be focused on ourselves, they take in kids. They adopt, practically speaking, their friends' kids. They have parties where they're the only adults in the room on purpose because they want to have fun with just the kids. And they really enjoy life vicariously through others. There's still an element of tragedy there, and there's another poem he wrote in the midst of this that I want to read to you next, about being alive and why that's miraculous, but also, I think there's a bit of pathos in here. I'll go and start here. This is by the Babe and Born from a collection of poems, 1900. The trees were tall and grass is short, as in some crazy tale. Here and there a sea were blue beyond the breaking pale. The fixed fire hung in the air to warm me one day through. The deep green hair grew on great hills. I know what I should do. In dark I lie, dreaming that there are great eyes, cold or kind, and twisted streets and silent doors, lest you living men behind. Let storm clouds come and batter an hour, and leave to weep and fight, then all the ages I have ruled, the empires of the night. I think that if they gave me leave within the world to stand, I would be good for all the day I spent in fairyland. They should not hear a word from me of selfishness or scorn, only to find the door if only I were born. I think it's it is interesting that see and almost sort of re-experience that longing for a new life, but also, again, to be appreciative of his own life. This is a theme he would come back to throughout his adult writing years. This idea that being born is the ultimate adventure, in his words. But as he thinks about this, I can't help but think also that he was thinking about his own childlessness. And that's the second incident I wanted to mention. The third is the death of his brother Cecil. Cecil was also a journalist and essayist like his brother, a little more serious, skinnier than G.K. Chesterton. Joined the British Army in 1916, died in the last day of the war from a fever. It was very sad, very tragic. It destroyed Chesterton. He was distraught. Cecil had just married a few months before this. They were very close. And the normally ebullient and engaged Chesterton, who was very supportive of the war effort against the German Empire, found himself not knowing what to do next. So he did what he often did when he was experiencing tragedy or grief. He wrote a poem. Here's his take. It was hearty, and I'll just read this to you now. The men that worked for England, they have their graves at home, and bees and birds of England about the cross can roam. But they that fought for England, following a falling star, alas for England, they have their graves afar. And they that ruled England in stately conclave met, alas for England, they had no graves as yet. So it's his anti-war poem, basically, and his anti-government poem. He was by no means someone who hated government. He was a distributionist, so he believed in small government, but he's still somebody who was in favor of a good cause. But this Sassoonian, this Wilfred Owen-like poem is written in a moment of raw emotion, published many years later after his brother's death, but written in the weeks and days after it happened. I love how he is a faithful Christian and says to himself and other people, I don't like this world sometimes. I really don't know what God's plan is about. You can write some poetry now and talk about it. He wasn't writing a happy poem. He didn't give up poetry. He didn't stop engaging with his friends and family and audience and readers. He still walked through that valley, and I think it's amazing. I love the fact that he was a real poet in that sense. And not just the joyful guy you see in the pictures. Assumes autobiography here. This is the thought that guided him. The doctrine I should always like to teach is the idea of taking things with gratitude, not taking things for granted. This is published after he passed away, about a year afterwards, a few months afterwards. Unless you think this is something that was only a one-time thing, we did have another thought from him, which I have from his awesome biography by Joseph Pierce, which is good to read. You've got to be happy in those quiet moments when you remember that you are alive. And I think that's a wonderful thought. The fact he was alive, he suffered, he thought about the joy and honor of being alive, and was still depressed and still sad, really inspires me. I think his poetry can be a bit silly and paradoxical and a bit loose in the ends. He loved Clara Hughes and limericks and sort of silly forms, I guess you might call them. He also wrote epic poems and poems about death and tragedy and loss. He's worth our reconsidering and our rediscovery today. And I would definitely recommend you start with Man Alive. These are also wonderful biographies of him. Man Alive is his short, skinny, wacky novel about a man who marries his wife over and over again, breaks into his own house, eats the same foods but different ways, travels around the world, rediscovers how amazing it is to be simply alive. And so that's why I think you guys should read G.K. Chesterton. That's why I love him and why you should love him too. Thank you very much. Any questions for me about GKC? Yes?
What's your favorite G.K. Chesterton quote?
Ooh, let's see. I think I like his quote about Irish people. He says, I prefer to agree with the prophetic Irishmen and prophesy after the fact about anything, which is very easy to do. But he has all kinds of witty sayings and fun things like that. That's one of them. It'd be hard to pick. I have many that I say to my fiance's annoyance. She's like, that's a G.K. Chesterton quote, isn't it? It's like, yes, it is. That's one of them. Other questions? Yes, Teresa.
So, did he work for a particular newspaper? Was he a freelance journalist?
He worked for many. He was working in what was called Fleet Street, which is in London where all the newspapers were. And he wrote for a variety of magazines and newspapers. Eventually he was forced to move to the country by Francie because he was getting so fat and so big and so unhealthy that she had to remove him from his journalist friends because they were not making it easier for him to be healthy. So they went to live in the countryside, but he still wrote as a freelance at that point, and wrote enough that he would never have never had to worry really about money again, because he was such a prolific writer, thousands and thousands of words each week for most of his life, until the last week or so of his life. Yes?
I'm curious to know if you chose to leave out his connection to C.S. Lewis on purpose, and what that was about.
Sure. The reason why I looked it up is I could talk about it for like hours and hours. In Lewis's Surprised by Joy, there's a nice passage where he talks about how he was recovering in a field hospital in France. He finds this odd little book by G.K. Chesterton called Orthodoxy, and he starts reading it. He discovers to his horror that Chesterton is a Christian, and he is delighted at the same time. And in some ways, Lewis owes a great deal to Chesterton. In fact, his Mere Christianity could be said to be his revised version of Orthodoxy, a little more serious-minded, talks about ideals and sort of proper forms and Christian life. But you could draw a line from G.K. Chesterton's Orthodox through Mere Christianity all the way to John Stott's Basic Christianity, I think, in that sort of popular, outward-facing, happy, joyful apologetic. And so there's definitely a huge connection between the two. They were acquaintances, they liked each other, but they were never really close friends. Chesterton was not an inkling. He was sort of in the periphery of that. He was tied to all kinds of other interesting people, like Maurice Baring, and then Dorothy Sayers also had a nice run-in with Chesterton. He helped launch her career, kind of by accident, but that's another story for another time. So he had a big impact on a bunch of other people who loved the fact he was a joyful, engaged, smart, brief, observing Christian writer at a time when that wasn't very cool. Kind of like today, it's not very cool to be a faithful Christian person in popular culture. He didn't care. He was so big and so happy and loved kids too much. So mind that. I think there's a danger with reviving him, though, thinking about this a bit more. We can maybe give him our words and say, hey, G.K. Chesterton said that, must be true or cool. He had flaws. He, as I was telling Tracer before I talked, he had anti-Semitic inclinations, like many people did at the time. He later recanted from those and began to realize that he'd been wrong, especially when the Nazis started appearing on the horizon. So he's not a perfect figure by any means. But there's a huge tie between him and Lewis, I would say.
Thank you.
Yes?
It makes sense why you'd be drawn to him as a newspaperman.
Yes.
And as an essayist, I think he's unparalleled, but I've never even heard Chesterton the poet. That's how you came to him that way. And did he consider himself a poet his whole life, or was it like C.S. Lewis, he tried when he was young and then got over it?
He was a poet his whole life. There's some poems from his tween years, and they're not very good, but they're also kind of good at the same time. They're like good, bad. Good, bad poems. I found out that he had written poetry when I was living in the UK, and I was like, I have read all his big novels, and now what do I do? So I went on Project Gutenberg, and it was like, oh, he has some poems on here. So I read on that scrolly, long screen, his poems. Like, these are actually kind of good, and some of them are not so good, but most of them are pretty good. He was definitely a poet, I think, alongside other things. An essayist first, and primarily. That's how I have it.
It's wonderful.
Thank you. Anything else? Yes. Jeremy.
Chesterton through Father Brown.
Very good. I'm glad you came to him.
Yeah, and I guess I have a question, it's just an observation. I was unaware of Orthodoxy, but was always impressed within the Father Brown mysteries how well he defended faith
Oh, yes.
in his fictional context. And this puts that in more context.
Thanks. If you like that, The Ball and the Cross is another sort of crazy chase story he wrote about an atheist, Irishman actually, arguing with a Catholic person about why Jesus is a real person and why they should be believing in him. I also recommend that too, if you haven't read that. I recommend everything he wrote, basically. It's all awesome. Some of it's less awesome than other things, but most of it's pretty good. Any other final questions? Yes.
Kind of opposite, but who was his illustrator for pictures and like his?
You know the awesome thing about Chesterton is? He did all that himself.
Did he really?
Yeah, all his stories and crazy little characters in his poems, he hand drew those.
Did it?
Much like Tolkien drew his own stories, and Lewis also. He had multiple talents. He never quite finished his art school program because he was too lazy and distracted. So he never took a degree from the Slade School of Art, but he learned enough there that he could always illustrate his own columns and stories and poems throughout his life. Awesome. Well, thank you guys very much for your time.